This meant you were rich in the 1960s. If your family had even one of these things in the 1960s, chances are the neighbors thought you were loaded. Back then, wealth didn't always mean mansions or yachts. It showed up in everyday luxuries that made jaws drop. Today, we're taking a look at the subtle but powerful signs that meant you were living large in the 60s. Having a dishwasher. Back in the 1960s, if you had a dishwasher in your kitchen, people didn't just think you were lucky, they figured you were living the high life. In a decade when most families still tackled dirty dishes by hand, often after every single meal, owning a machine that did it for you felt downright futuristic. Dishwashers weren't just practical, they were a statement. They gleamed under the kitchen light like a chrome trophy, whispering to every guest that this household could afford both time and technology. And they weren't cheap either. At a time when average folks prioritized essentials over luxuries, investing in a dishwasher meant you had extra room in the budget. Relatives would bring it up in conversation, neighbors might sneak a peek, and suddenly, your kitchen became something of a modern marvel. It was the era when appliances started representing success, and the dishwasher sat at the top of that list. Even the ads back then sold it as a dream come true for the American housewife. In a world without microwaves or smart gadgets, that hum of automation was pure magic. 2 cars in the driveway. Remember when the real American dream was having one car for the family and another just to show off in the driveway? In the 1960s, that second car wasn't just a mode of transportation, it was a badge of honor. While the average household managed just fine with a single vehicle, having 2 meant you were a step above. It told the world you had some financial breathing room, and maybe even a few luxuries tucked into your lifestyle. I once heard about a neighborhood kid who'd brag that his mom had her own car. And the rest of us? We'd just stare, awestruck, like he lived in a mansion. And if one of those cars was a Cadillac, that wasn't just wealth, that was prestige wrapped in chrome. Back then, Cadillacs were the pinnacle, smooth rides with tail fins that looked like they belonged in a parade. But beyond the flash, 2 cars meant independence. Mom didn't have to wait for Dad to get home just to make a grocery run. She had keys of her own, and that changed the rhythm of daily life. In a world where ownership still felt rare, 2 cars said, "We've made it." Flying on airplanes for vacation. There was a time when stepping onto an airplane felt like entering another world, one filled with pressed suits, polished smiles, and a quiet sense of prestige. In the 1960s, flying wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was an event, a privilege, and for most, a dream just out of reach. Families who vacationed by plane were seen as having truly made it because commercial air travel was far from common. While the average American family packed up the station wagon for a long, dusty drive, those with money-boarded sleek jets that soared above the clouds, heading for destinations like Disneyland in California or the sunny beaches of Miami. Airline tickets cost more than most could justify, and that price tag alone made flying a rare luxury. Even the airports had an air of glamour, with travelers dressed in their Sunday best. Everything, from the stewardess uniforms to the in-flight meals served on real trays, whispered sophistication. To fly for leisure back then wasn't just a mode of travel. It was a declaration. You belonged to a different tier of life. And for those who did, the sky wasn't the limit. It was just the beginning. Private bedroom for each child. If you grew up in the 1960s and didn't have to share a bedroom, congratulations. You basically had the kid version of a penthouse suite. Back then, most families packed 2, sometimes 3 kids into a single room like sardines, in bunk beds. So, when a child had 4 walls and a door all to themselves, it wasn't just a room. It was a revelation. It hinted at something more than just floor space. It meant the family had the means to afford a larger home. possibly one with that extra bedroom that wasn't being used as a sewing room or a storage closet. For the lucky few, that room became a sanctuary. Kids would pick out paint swatches from the Sears catalog or beg for Snoopy wallpaper, adding their own little touches of personality. And with that came a rare sense of ownership, of space, privacy, and a bit of independence. In a time when square footage was sacred and privacy was a luxury, having your own room didn't just feel special. It felt like you'd earned your place in the world. It was your first real taste of freedom, and it mattered more than most people remember. American Express card. What if the simple act of paying for dinner could instantly tell the world you'd arrived? In the 1960s, flashing an American Express card was like putting a spotlight on your social standing. It wasn't just a piece of plastic, it was a quiet, gleaming badge of distinction. Back then, credit cards weren't common in everyday life. Most people paid with cash or checks, and only a select few carried a charge card, let alone one as exclusive as American Express. The company intentionally marketed to the upper crust, setting higher fees and limiting approvals, which only added to the mystique. Using one at a fine restaurant or hotel made an impression. People noticed. And when Amex introduced the Gold Card in the mid-60s, it wasn't just about convenience anymore. It was about image, lifestyle, and access. It meant you traveled, dined in style, and moved in circles where luxury was the norm. In an era where financial privacy was prized and indulgence was rarely flaunted, simply having that card in your wallet whispered, "I've made it," without needing to say a word. Did your family own any of these things back in the 60s? If so, which one made you feel the proudest? 2 living rooms. There was a quiet kind of prestige in walking into a home and realizing it had not just one, but 2 living rooms. In those days, most families were lucky to have a single gathering space. But when a second room existed solely for show, you knew you'd stepped into a different class of living. The formal living room was rarely touched, its furniture often wrapped in thick plastic that crinkled when you sat down, if you were even allowed to. Curtains stayed drawn to protect the upholstery, and not a single cushion was out of place. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about presentation, legacy, and social standing. The other living room, the real one, was where life happened. Homework, television, laughter after dinner. But that untouched room, that was reserved for guests and special occasions, a symbol of control and grace in a world that was often anything but. Having that extra space meant something back then. It told your neighbors you valued beauty, you hosted with pride, and more than anything else, you had the means to separate function from form. And that said a lot. Color TV, especially more than one. Few household upgrades in the 1960s sparked more envy or admiration than the arrival of a color television. For families who managed to bring one home, it was more than just a box with moving pictures. It was a glowing badge of modern success. While most living rooms still revolved around grainy black and white sets, color TV brought the world to life in rich, saturated hues that felt almost magical. Shows like Bonanza or The Wonderful World of Disney didn't just entertain, they dazzled. And if someone owned more than one TV, that wasn't convenience. It was a quiet declaration of serious wealth. These sets weren't cheap. In fact, in the early 60s, a color television could easily cost hundreds of dollars, several weeks or even months of pay for the average worker. Not everyone could justify it, but those who could often became the center of attention. Neighbors would gather for special broadcasts, peeking into a future they couldn't yet afford. In those days, a color TV didn't just change how you watched, it changed how others saw you. 2 bathrooms. What did it mean when a family in the 60s had not one but 2 bathrooms? Well, to put it simply, it meant they were doing something right. Most homes built before or just after the war came with a single bathroom, and that one got a workout. I still remember standing in line outside ours as a kid, clutching my lunchbox, trying not to be late while my sister took her sweet time fixing her bangs in the mirror. So when a friend casually mentioned their house had a guest bathroom, I couldn't even picture it. A second bathroom felt almost excessive, like having a refrigerator just for soda. But it wasn't just about comfort. Adding or buying a home with two meant real money had been spent, and not everyone could swing that. It signaled financial breathing room, a touch of modern convenience in a time when space and plumbing weren't taken for granted. For parents, it meant privacy. For kids, it meant fewer morning meltdowns. And for everyone else, it quietly said, "This family's got it figured out." Back then, an extra bathroom wasn't just about plumbing. It was a marker of prosperity you didn't have to show off. It showed itself. Central air conditioning. Stepping into a home chilled by central air in the 1960s felt like walking into the future. While most families sweated through the summer with box fans in the window or rattling AC units that barely cooled one room, central air whispered something different: comfort, modernity, and quiet wealth. It wasn't just about beating the heat. It was about living in a house that felt polished and ahead of its time. I still remember the first time I visited a neighbor's home with central air. The air felt cooler, yes, but the house somehow seemed more elegant, more put together, and people noticed. Whenever the HVAC work trucks pulled into a driveway, whispers would ripple down the block. "They must have come into some money," someone would say. Because make no mistake, central air was a serious investment. Not just the installation, which wasn't cheap, but the electric bills that came after. Only families with a steady income and some breathing room in the budget could swing it. And for those who could, their homes became a quiet symbol of success. At a time when luxury was subtle and status wasn't always spoken aloud, cool air on a hot day said more than words ever could. Two-story house. How do you spot the fancy house on the block in 1965? Easy, the one with stairs. In a decade dominated by low-slung ranch-style homes, the two-story house stood tall, literally and figuratively. It was more than just extra square footage. It was a quiet, confident flex. Those extra steps told neighbors you had a little more money, a little more space, and maybe a little more style than the average Joe. Inside, the layout often included more bedrooms for growing families, sometimes even a den or a formal dining room that only got used on Thanksgiving. And in some cases, an intercom system on the wall that made everyone feel like they were living in the future. I still remember visiting a classmate whose upstairs had its own bathroom and a bonus room for toys. It felt like visiting a small hotel. Having a second story meant separation. Adults downstairs, kids upstairs, and a whole new sense of privacy. But more than anything, it meant your family had options. At a time when most folks measured success in square feet and stairs, a two-story home wasn't just where you lived, it was a symbol of how far you'd come. If you enjoyed this video, tap that like button, subscribe, and don't forget the bell so you're first in line for the next memory lane stroll. TV Guide subscription. Before streaming, DVRs, or even VCRs, the most glamorous way to know what was on TV next week came printed on glossy paper and stacked neatly by the checkout aisle. In the 1960s, picking up a fresh copy of TV Guide wasn't just about planning your week of shows, it was a subtle nod to modern living. While many households relied on the daily newspaper for bare-bones listings, those who splurged on TV Guide were making a quiet statement. They had a few extra cents to spend, and they cared about more than just what was on Channel 3. This pocket-sized magazine packed far more than programming grids. It came alive with colorful photos, interviews with television stars, and sneak peeks into upcoming episodes. It brought Hollywood into the living room and made the small screen feel like a big deal. I remember flipping through it on Saturday mornings, circling must-watch specials with a red pen while sipping Tang in my pajamas. In a time when media access was limited and tightly scheduled, TV Guide gave families a sense of control and even a touch of luxury. Owning it wasn't just about watching TV. It was about belonging to the moment. Flocked Christmas tree. All it took was a dusting of artificial snow to turn an ordinary Christmas tree into a suburban spectacle. In the 1960s, a flocked tree, white, fluffy, and sparkling like it had just come down from the North Pole, wasn't something you picked up on a whim. It cost extra, and you could bet your neighbors noticed. My family couldn't afford one, but every year we'd drive past the Wilsons' house just to admire theirs. It stood in their front window like a department store display, decked out in silver tinsel, color-coordinated ornaments, and bubble lights that danced like tiny lava lamps. Mrs. Wilson told my mom it had been professionally flocked at the garden center and came wrapped in plastic to protect it until decorating day. That little detail? Pure luxury. Most families had to settle for a basic green tree with a few handmade ornaments, but a flocked one meant you had a little extra cash and a whole lot of pride in presentation. It was a symbol of taste and trendiness, and just rare enough to feel exclusive. In a season all about warmth and wonder, that snowy white tree gave off a cool kind of glow you couldn't miss. Riding lawnmower. Ever see someone riding their lawnmower like it was a Cadillac? In the 1960s, that wasn't just grass cutting, it was status on display. At a time when most families pushed a rattling mower across their modest yard in the blazing sun, the sight of a neighbor smoothly cruising behind the wheel of a riding mower was enough to stop you mid-sip of lemonade. These machines weren't cheap. Brands like John Deere and International Harvester sold models that cost hundreds of dollars, a hefty sum for the average household. But the investment wasn't just about convenience, it was about image. A perfect lawn had become a modern-day badge of honor in the growing suburbs, and the riding mower was its crown jewel. I still remember the Andersons down the block. Mr. Anderson would mow in pressed khakis, waving like he was in a parade. The grass always looked like it belonged on a golf course. Some families even skipped the chore entirely and hired gardeners, which was practically unheard of back then. Whether you were behind the wheel or paid someone else to steer it, a lush, symmetrical lawn wasn't just about pride. It was proof that your family had arrived. In-ground swimming pool. By the mid-1960s, nothing said you'd made it, quite like stepping into your own backyard and diving into a sunlit in-ground pool. While most families were cooling off with a garden hose or piling into the car for a trip to the local public pool, those lucky few with crystal-clear water shimmering just beyond the patio were living in a different reality. These pools weren't just expensive to install. They came with ongoing maintenance, higher utility bills, and plenty of responsibility. But for the families who could afford one, it was all worth it. I remember going to the Pattersons' house 2 streets over. Their pool had underwater lights, a diving board, and even a small tiki bar setup where the grown-ups sipped iced tea that probably wasn't just tea. Cookouts turned into pool parties, and suddenly, they were the center of the neighborhood every summer. It wasn't just fun, it was flair. Above-ground pools were fine, but an in-ground pool? That was elegance poured in concrete. In a decade when leisure itself was a luxury, having a private oasis at home was more than convenience. It was a quiet, glistening badge of success. Having a housekeeper. If your mom didn't have to mop the floors while balancing a roast in the oven and yelling at you to set the table, you might have had a housekeeper. In the 1960s, hiring someone to clean your home was more than just convenient. It was a glowing neon sign that your family had a little extra cushion in the budget. Most folks managed their households on one income, which meant every dish scrubbed and floor swept was a badge of honor. But The families who brought in outside help, they were playing in a different league. I remember visiting a friend's house where the windows gleamed. The carpets held those fresh vacuum lines, and not a speck of dust dared settle on the coffee table. Their housekeeper wore a pressed uniform and called my friend's mother, ma'am. I thought I had stepped into a hotel. It wasn't just the cleanliness. It was the order, the elegance, the sense that someone had time to fluff pillows just right. And in an era where appearances mattered and company often dropped by unannounced, a tidy home wasn't just impressive, it was a social statement. Having a housekeeper meant your family had arrived. Quietly, but unmistakably. Were there any other status symbols in the 1960s that we didn't mention in the video? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Owning a yacht or recreational boat. What was the ultimate flex in the 1960s? Owning your own boat, and not just a rowboat or a dinghy, but a real recreational cruiser, maybe even a small yacht with a name painted across the stern and polished chrome railings that gleamed in the sun. Back then, boating wasn't a casual hobby, it was a luxury lifestyle. Most working-class families spent weekends mowing the lawn or fixing up the garage. But if you had a vessel sitting in a slip at the marina, that meant you'd climbed a different kind of ladder. I still remember the summer a neighbor rolled through town towing a sleek Chris Craft behind his Cadillac. The whole block came out to stare. The smell of varnished wood and the sound of the engine idling felt like something out of a Hollywood movie. Boats weren't just expensive to buy. They came with maintenance, fuel, docking fees, and insurance. That's why only the well-to-do could afford one. Even chartering a yacht for a weekend was reserved for the upper crust. In a time when success wasn't flaunted so openly, pulling away from the dock with sunglasses on and the wind in your hair said everything, without saying a word. Sending children to private school. Nothing turned more heads at the bus stop than a kid in a pressed blazer carrying a leather satchel, especially when the rest of us were in scuffed sneakers and hand-me-down jeans. In the 1960s, sending your child to private school wasn't just about better education. It was a bold, unmistakable display of wealth and aspiration. Most families relied on public schools, which were decent but crowded. Private schools, on the other hand, came with uniforms, Latin classes, and tuition fees that made your neighbors blink. I remember one boy in our neighborhood who attended a prep academy an hour away. His dad drove a Buick Riviera, his lunches came wrapped in waxed butcher paper, and his shoes always shined like they were polished by angels. It wasn't just about reading and arithmetic, it was a lifestyle. These schools offered connections, discipline, and a polished image that lasted well beyond graduation. And while the average household was pinching pennies, these families were writing checks for enrollment and proudly framing acceptance letters to Ivy League feeder schools. Back then, private education wasn't just a parental choice. It was a powerful signal that your family had the means, the values, and the vision to rise above the rest. Owning a vacation home. What kind of family had 2 refrigerators, one for home and one for the lake? The kind that owned a vacation home in the 1960s. And let me tell you, that was no small feat. Back then, most folks were focused on paying off their one and only mortgage. But for the fortunate few who could swing a second property, it was the ultimate sign that they'd made it. Whether it was a cottage near Cape Cod, a cabin in the Adirondacks, or a cozy hideaway in the Smokies, a vacation home wasn't just a luxury, it was a declaration. I knew a kid whose family had one near Lake Geneva. Every Monday, he'd come back with mosquito bites, Polaroids of sunsets, and stories about boating and campfires that made the rest of us green with envy. But owning a second home meant more than weekend escapes. It meant paying for upkeep, furniture, travel, and often a second set of everything, from sheets to dishes. In a time when most families vacationed by loading up the station wagon and staying at motels, having a place of your own to get away wasn't just convenient. It was proof that your hard work had paid off. twice. Wearing a fur coat. Stepping out in a fur coat during the 1960s wasn't just about staying warm, it was about making a statement without saying a word. In an era when most winter wear was practical and plain, fur was reserved for those who lived a rung or two higher on the social ladder. Whether it was full-length mink or a cropped fox jacket, fur carried the weight of status, style, and old-school glamour. These coats didn't just appear, they were carefully selected, often gifted on milestone anniversaries, or passed down like heirlooms. I still remember the hush that fell over the room when my cousin's fiancée arrived at Christmas wearing hers. It shimmered under the lights and swayed as she moved, like something out of a Hollywood premiere. The price tag alone could rival a family's annual grocery bill, and keeping it stored, cleaned, and protected was its own kind of investment. Fur in the 60s wasn't just a trend. It was tradition, luxury, and quiet power all sewn into one. And while fashion has changed back then, when a woman walked into a room draped in fur, it told you everything you needed to know. She belonged to a world most people only dreamed of. Hi-fi stereo systems. Only the truly well-off could afford furniture that doubled as a concert hall. In the 1960s, a hi-fi stereo system wasn't just an audio device. It was a full-blown status symbol parked right in the middle of the living room. These machines were massive, built into elegant wooden consoles, sometimes stretching 6 feet long and polished to a showroom shine. They didn't just play records, they transformed listening into an event. Families would gather around as if tuning into a live performance, whether it was Dean Martin or Dave Brubeck spinning on the turntable. I remember my neighbor's dad showing off his Macintosh amp like it was a prized muscle car. The controls looked like something off a spaceship, and no kid was allowed within arm's reach. Buying one of these systems cost a small fortune, not to mention the growing vinyl collection you needed to go with it. While most families settled for small tabletop radios, those with hi-fis were clearly a cut above. The sound was rich, warm, and immersive, and so was the impression it left. If you had a hi-fi system in the 60s, it meant you didn't just enjoy music. You had the money to make it sound perfect. Remember when Friday nights meant TGIF, airport goodbyes happened at the gate, and everyone knew the Macarena? The 70s through the 90s gave us unforgettable trends, tech, and pop culture moments. Some legendary, some laughable, all gone forever. Let's take a nostalgic trip back to the things we'll never see again, but we'll never forget. Hitchhiking. Back in the 1970s, if you didn't have a car, it wasn't a big deal. All you had to do was stand by the road, stick out your thumb, and wait for a friendly driver to offer you a lift. It was an easy and free way to travel, especially for young, adventurous spirits who wanted to explore without the burden of bus schedules or cab fares. But over time, hitchhiking started to fade away. Safety became a huge concern. The rise of crime stories in the news, along with terrifying movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, made people think twice before hopping into a stranger's car or picking up a stranger themselves. Eventually, hitchhiking nearly disappeared as people turned to safer transportation options. Schoolhouse rock. Saturday mornings in the 1970s and 80s were all about lounging in front of the TV with a big bowl of sugary cereal, watching cartoons that were pure fun. No lessons, no homework, just entertainment. But Schoolhouse Rock found a clever way to sneak in some learning without kids even realizing it. With its catchy songs and fun animations, it taught everything from multiplication and American history to grammar and civics. Before you knew it, kids across the country could sing about conjunctions, interjections, and even explain how a bill becomes a law, all without ever opening a textbook. It was a rare blend of education and entertainment that stuck with a generation. But sadly, Educational programming like this has mostly disappeared from Saturday mornings. Pull tabs on cans. Back in the 1970s, cracking open a soda or beer wasn't as simple as it is today. Instead of a stay-on tab, you had to yank a metal ring that peeled back a wedge-shaped opening on the top of the can. The problem? That sharp little tab was completely detachable, and people tossed them everywhere. Sidewalks, parks, and beaches were littered with them, turning those tiny scraps of metal into a real hazard. Countless people ended up with cuts on their feet just from walking barefoot. It became such a problem that by the early 1980s, a safer alternative was introduced: the stay tab, which remains attached to the can after opening. Just like that, the era of discarded pull tabs came to an end. TV sign-offs and test patterns. Back in the 1970s, television wasn't a 24/7 affair. If you stayed up too late, you'd eventually run out of things to watch. Instead of endless reruns or infomercials, stations would simply sign off for the night. You'd see a test pattern, a strange, colorful graphic on the screen, sometimes accompanied by an annoying tone. Other times, stations would end their broadcast with something patriotic, like the national anthem playing over an image of the American flag. But after that, just static. Night owls had no choice but to call it a night. It wasn't until the rise of cable television in the 80s and 90s that TV became a non-stop, around-the-clock experience, making test patterns a thing of the past. Slide projector shows. Before smartphones and social media, sharing vacation photos was a much more interactive experience, whether you wanted it to be or not. If your neighbors went on a trip in the 1970s, there was a good chance you'd be invited over for a slide show. They'd dim the lights, load their vacation slides into a bulky carousel projector, and click through every single photo, one by one, while delivering long-winded stories about each shot. The projector's hum filled the room, dust floated through the light beam, and every so often, a slide would pop up upside down, adding to the awkwardness. It was a social obligation few could escape, but thankfully, with the rise of digital photography, this tedious tradition eventually faded away. What's one thing from the 70s that you wish would make a comeback? Spuds MacKenzie. In 1987, during Super Bowl 22, the world was introduced to a new pop culture sensation: Spuds MacKenzie, the ultimate party animal. This laid-back, sunglasses-wearing bull terrier quickly became the face of Bud Light, exuding effortless cool and living the high life surrounded by beautiful women. Spuds wasn't just a commercial star, his image was everywhere, on t-shirts, bumper stickers, posters, and even toys. For a brief moment, he was one of the most recognizable mascots of the decade, but like many 80s icons, controversy wasn't far behind. The biggest twist? Spuds MacKenzie was actually a female dog named Honeytree Evil Eye. Despite the scandal, Spuds remained an unforgettable part of 80s advertising history before fading into nostalgia. The mullet. The mullet was the hairstyle of the 1980s, bold, rebellious, and impossible to ignore. Worn by both men and women, it was defined by its signature contrast: short and neat in the front, long and wild in the back. This business in the front, party in the back style was embraced by pop culture icons like Rob Lowe, Patrick Swayze, and tennis star Andre Agassi, making it a must-have look for anyone wanting to channel effortless cool. Whether paired with ripped denim, a leather jacket, or a neon windbreaker, the mullet was a statement of pure 80s attitude. Though the style eventually faded, it left an undeniable mark on the decade and still pops up today as a nostalgic, ironic fashion choice. Trapper Keeper. If you were a student in the 1980s, having a Trapper Keeper wasn't just about staying organized, it was about showing off your style. These ultra-cool binders had everything built in: folders, a clipboard, a pencil pouch, and that satisfying Velcro flap that made opening it feel like unlocking a secret weapon. The covers came in all sorts of eye-catching designs, from neon geometric patterns to dreamy landscapes, making it feel like a personalized school essential. Every kid either had one or desperately wanted one, but as the years went on, their bulky plastic frames, limited storage space, and small 1-inch rings just couldn't keep up. By the 90s, they were mostly replaced by larger, more practical binders, but they remain a beloved piece of 80s nostalgia. Potpourri. Back in the 1980s, no home was complete without at least one decorative bowl of potpourri. In fact, there were usually several scattered around the house, on coffee tables, in bathrooms, and even tucked inside dresser drawers. These colorful mixtures of dried flower petals, fruits, and spices weren't just for decoration. They filled the air with sweet, lingering fragrances, long before plug-in air fresheners and scented candles took over. Lavender, rose, cinnamon. Each blend offered a different scent to match the mood of the room. And if you were ever stumped on a gift for mom, potpourri was the answer. Parachute pants. In the 1980s, if you wanted to breakdance, you needed the right gear. Enter parachute pants. Made from lightweight, swishy nylon, these skin-tight pants became a must-have for dancers and street performers looking to spin, slide, and pop with ease. Companies like Bugle Boy made them famous, with their multiple zippers and futuristic, almost metallic look. By the mid-80s, these slim-fitting pants were everywhere, embraced by breakdancers and trendsetters alike. But as the decade progressed, fashion shifted. The tight style gave way to the loose, ultra-baggy pants made famous by MC Hammer, perfect for busting out moves like the Running Man. Floppy disks. In the 1990s, as personal computers became more common in households, people needed a way to store and transfer files easily. Enter the floppy disk, a small, square, plastic-covered storage device that quickly became a must-have for computer users everywhere. These 3.5-inch disks were the go-to solution for saving documents, software, and even early computer games. Almost every desk had a stack of them, labeled with everything from school essays to business spreadsheets. While they only held a small amount of data by today's standards, they were revolutionary at the time. But as technology advanced, floppy disks couldn't keep up. By the early 2000s, they were replaced by CDs, USB drives, and eventually, cloud storage, turning them into just another nostalgic memory of the digital age. Dial-up internet. If there's one sound that instantly transports you back to the mid-1990s, it's the screeching, beeping symphony of a dial-up modem connecting to the internet. Back then, AOL ruled the online world, and logging in meant hearing that unmistakable noise, followed by the exciting, "You've got mail" greeting. But getting online wasn't instant. It took patience. And once you were connected, the phone line was off limits. If someone in the house picked up the phone, your connection would drop, sending you right back to square one. It was a frustrating but unforgettable part of early internet life. As broadband took over in the 2000s, dial-up faded into history, but for those who lived through it, that nostalgic sound remains a symbol of the internet's early days. Beanie Babies. Few toy crazes in the 1990s were as intense or as financially hyped as Beanie Babies. What started as a simple $5 plush toy for kids quickly turned into a nationwide obsession. Certain rare Beanie Babies skyrocketed in value, with collectors paying thousands for the most sought-after ones. People scoured toy stores, flea markets, and gift shops in hopes of finding a hidden gem that could make them rich. Even McDonald's got involved, releasing teeny beanies in Happy Meals, which became instant collectibles. But like most fads, the bubble eventually burst. By the late 90s, Beanie Babies lost their magic, and once priceless collectibles were being sold in bargain bins, proving that not every craze turns into a fortune. Please comment 1 to let me know you'll be watching this video until the end. Pagers. Before everyone had a cell phone in their pocket, the pager was the must-have device for staying connected in the 1990s. Clipped to your waistband or belt, it would beep or vibrate, displaying a simple number on its tiny screen. Your cue to find the nearest payphone and call back. By 1994, pagers were everywhere, with over 61 million in use worldwide. Even teenagers had them, but that quickly led to controversy. Schools started banning them because they were unfairly associated with drug dealers and shady business. As cell phones from Nokia and Motorola became more affordable in the late 90s, pagers rapidly fell out of fashion. Once a status symbol, they were soon just another relic of pre-smartphone communication. Y2K panic. As the year 2000 approached, the world braced for what many feared would be a technological disaster: Y2K. The problem? Early computer systems only used 2 digits to represent the year, meaning there was widespread concern that when the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 2000, computers would interpret 00 as 1900, causing massive system failures. Banks, airlines, hospitals, and power grids were all at risk. Or so people thought. The uncertainty led to full-blown panic. Some withdrew cash, stocked up on food and water, and even prepared for power outages. But thanks to years of programming fixes and system upgrades, very little actually went wrong when the new millennium arrived. What was expected to be chaos turned out to be a global sigh of relief. Oversized collars. Fashion in the 1970s was all about making a statement, and nothing screamed stylish louder than massive, exaggerated collars. These weren't your average shirt collars. They were wide, floppy, and often extended far beyond the shoulders. Men's fashion embraced this look with fitted shirts, leisure suits, and even jackets featuring these dramatic lapels. And if you were really on trend, you'd pop that shirt collar right over your jacket for extra flair. Bonus points if your shirt was unbuttoned just enough to show off a hairy chest and a gold chain. This bold style was everywhere, on disco dance floors, in casual wear, and even in business attire. But like all trends, it eventually faded, making way for the sleeker, more understated styles of the 1980s. 1970s, sideburns. Sideburns weren't just facial hair in the 1970s, they were a full-on fashion statement. What started as a rebellious counterculture trend in the late 50s and 60s exploded into the mainstream by the early 70s, with men growing them out to near Civil War proportions. These weren't just subtle trims along the jawline, they were bold, bushy, and often extended down to the chin. Icons like Richard Roundtree, Burt Reynolds, and of course, Elvis Presley made thick sideburns a signature look. Whether paired with a mustache or left on their own, they symbolized rugged masculinity and effortless cool. 1970s, upholstery. If you walked into a living room in the 1970s, chances are you'd be greeted by a sofa that practically shouted for attention. Upholstery during this decade wasn't about subtlety. It was all about bold, eye-catching patterns. Oversized floral prints, geometric designs, and swirling shapes covered couches in shades of brown, orange, and avocado green. These statement pieces weren't just furniture. They were a key part of the home's overall aesthetic, blending perfectly with shag carpets, wood-paneled walls, and heavy drapes. It was a look that defined the era, warm, cozy, and unmistakably 70s. But as interior design moved toward sleeker, more muted styles in the 1980s, those loud, patterned sofas slowly disappeared, making way for more understated home decor. 1970s, compact cars. The 1973 oil crisis changed the way Americans thought about cars. With gas prices skyrocketing, those big, gas-guzzling vehicles of the past became too expensive to keep on the road. Enter the era of compact cars, small, fuel-efficient, and, unfortunately, not the most stylish. Models like the Ford Pinto, AMC Gremlin, and AMC Pacer were designed to save money at the pump, but they sacrificed looks in the process. With their awkward shapes and odd proportions, they quickly earned a reputation for being some of the ugliest cars on the road. While they served their purpose for a time, automakers soon realized their mistakes. By 1980, all three were discontinued, paving the way for more refined and stylish compact cars in the decades to come. Disco era. The disco era may have been brief, but its impact on the 1970s was undeniable. What began in underground clubs in New York City quickly became a nationwide sensation, transforming music, dance, and fashion. The release of Saturday Night Fever in 1977 sent disco into overdrive, turning John Travolta into a style icon and filling dance floors with people eager to perfect their moves under the glow of a mirrored disco ball. Suddenly, everyone was grooving to the beats of ABBA, Donna Summer, the Village People, and, of course, the Bee Gees. The flashy outfits, platform shoes, and shimmering jumpsuits became just as iconic as the music itself. Though disco eventually faded, its legacy still lives on in pop culture, reminding us of a time when the dance floor was king. Streaking. Of all the wild trends to come out of the 1970s, streaking might just be the most bizarre. The idea was simple: strip down completely and run through a public place, usually for laughs and shock value. It started as a college prank, but quickly took over the country, with streakers popping up at sporting events, concerts, and even live TV broadcasts. By the mid-70s, it had reached its peak, becoming so popular that novelty products like streaking-themed t-shirts and gag gifts flooded the market. The craze even inspired The Streak, a hit comedy song by Ray Stevens that perfectly captured the absurdity of it all. Paper maps. Before GPS devices and smartphones made navigation effortless, road trips required a little more planning and a paper map. These large, foldable guides were a glove box essential, ready to be unfolded and never quite refolded the right way, whenever you needed directions. Whether it was a single state map or a full Rand McNally road atlas, these maps were the key to navigating the web of highways, interstates, and back roads across the country. If you missed a turn, there was no rerouting. You had to figure it out yourself. While paper maps still exist, they've become relics of a pre-digital era. Today, with Google and Apple Maps leading the way, most people wouldn't dream of using a paper map to get from point A to point B. Zima. In 1994, Coors introduced Zima, a clear, citrus-flavored malt beverage that aimed to revolutionize the alcohol market. Riding the wave of the clear drink trend, think Crystal Pepsi, Zima was positioned as a cool, modern alternative to beer. Coors poured a staggering $50 million into its first-year marketing campaign, and the investment initially paid off, with strong early sales. However, the drink struggled to find its audience. It was too light for beer drinkers, and its unique taste didn't quite catch on with the general public. By the late 90s, sales had plummeted, and by the early 2000s, Zima had vanished from store shelves. Though it made a brief comeback in 2017, it remains one of the more infamous beverage flops of the 90s. TGIF on ABC. For families in the 1990s, Friday nights meant one thing: TGIF on ABC. Unlike traditional kids programming, TGIF, thank goodness it's funny, was designed for everyone in the household. It was an event, bringing families together in front of the TV for a night of lighthearted sitcoms. Some of the most iconic shows of the decade, Full House, Family Matters, Boy Meets World, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch became staples of this beloved lineup. Much like Disney's Sunday night movies in previous generations, TGIF created shared television moments that parents and kids could enjoy together. But as TV evolved, the block ended in 2000. Still, its legacy lives on, with many TGIF classics finding new life in streaming and even modern reboots for today's audiences. Macarena. In 1996, a catchy beat and simple dance moves turned Macarena into a nationwide sensation. Originally a Spanish-language song, it exploded in popularity when the Bayside Boys released a remix featuring English lyrics. The song started in Miami's club scene but quickly spread like wildfire, eventually reaching the top of the US charts. When MTV aired the music video featuring its signature dance moves, everyone was doing the Macarena: kids, politicians, even nursing home residents. It was the dance craze of the decade, making its way into everything from sporting events to presidential rallies. VH1 later crowned it the greatest one-hit wonder of all time. Though its mainstream fame faded, the Macarena still lingers, living on at wedding receptions, school dances, and nostalgic 90s throwbacks. 1990s air travel. Flying in the 1990s was a completely different experience. Simpler, easier, and way less stressful. There were no long security lines, no shoe removal, and no limits on bringing your own food and drinks on board. Loved ones could walk you all the way to the gate and be waiting there when you landed, making arrivals and departures more personal and heartfelt. Airports felt more relaxed, and flying really did live up to the old slogan of the friendly skies. But all of that changed after the September 11th attacks in 2001. Security became much stricter, loved ones were banned from gate areas, and new airline fees made travel feel more like a hassle. The 1990s were the last decade of truly carefree air travel. Boomboxes. In the 1980s, if you wanted to take your music anywhere and make sure everyone heard it, you needed a boombox. These oversized portable stereos were built for volume, blasting music loud enough to turn any sidewalk, park, or street corner into a party. More than just a music player, a boombox could record radio stations, play cassette tapes, and even mix tracks, making it an essential tool in the rise of hip-hop and breakdancing culture. Carrying one on your shoulder became a status symbol, but as their popularity grew, so did noise complaints. By the late 80s, boomboxes started fading as personal headphones and Walkmans took over. Still, they left a lasting mark, especially with the unforgettable Say Anything scene where John Cusack held one high, cementing the boombox as a true pop culture icon. Milk carton kids. Long before Amber Alerts and social media, the faces of missing children appeared on something nearly every household had: the milk carton. It all started in the early 1980s when an Iowa dairy company printed a missing child's photo on its packaging. The idea quickly spread, and soon, breakfast tables across America featured somber black and white images of lost children, turning milk cartons into a nationwide bulletin board. While the campaign raised awareness, it also sparked fear, especially among kids eating their morning cereal. Unfortunately, it didn't prove very effective in actually locating missing children. Over time, people became desensitized to the images, and the campaign quietly faded away, replaced by more immediate and widespread alert systems like the Amber Alert. What's a nostalgic memory from your childhood that younger generations will never experience? Kmart's Blue Light Special. If you ever shopped at Kmart in the 1980s, you knew the excitement of the Blue Light Special. At any moment, a flashing blue police-style light would pop up in the store, and an announcement would echo through the aisles. Attention, Kmart shoppers! That meant one thing: a limited-time deal was happening right now. Shoppers would rush over, eager to snag a bargain before the light went off. At its peak, Kmart was the king of discount shopping, and the blue light special became part of pop culture. But as retail giants like Walmart rose to dominance, Kmart struggled to keep up. The once iconic promotion faded away, much like the chain itself, becoming just another nostalgic memory of the golden age of bargain shopping. Nintendo Power Glove. Few video game accessories have ever been as hyped or as disappointing as the Nintendo Power Glove. Released in 1989, this futuristic-looking controller had kids across America dreaming of a new way to play. It wasn't just advertised in commercials, it was showcased in the movie The Wizard, which made it look like the ultimate gaming gadget. The sleek robotic design and motion controls promised a revolutionary experience. The reality? It was clunky, frustrating, and barely worked as intended. Despite all the excitement, the Power Glove sold poorly, and after just a short time, it faded into obscurity. Bartles and Jamie's wine coolers. In 1981, E. and J. Gallo introduced Bartles and Jamie's wine coolers, and by the mid-1980s, they had become the drink of choice for young adults looking for something sweeter and lighter than beer. What really made them stand out, though, was their quirky ad campaign. Two fictional soft-spoken porch dwellers, Frank Bartles and Ed Jamies, charmed audiences with their slow, folksy endorsements, thanking customers for their support with a straight-faced sincerity that became their signature. By 1988, their popularity had skyrocketed, even landing them a coveted Super Bowl ad. At their peak, they were as iconic as Spuds MacKenzie and the "Where's the beef wire" lady. But like most trends, wine coolers eventually faded, and by the early 90s, Bartles and Jamie's was just another relic of the decade's pop culture boom. VHS tapes. By the early 1990s, the VHS tape was a household staple, transforming how people watched movies at home. Almost every family had a VCR, and with it came stacks of bulky VHS tapes, whether store-bought or recorded straight from TV. Video rental shops were booming, letting us bring home the latest blockbusters for a weekend movie night, just as long as we remembered to rewind before returning them. Fast-forwarding through previews and dealing with the occasional tape that got eaten by the VCR was all part of the experience. But as much as we loved them, VHS tapes had their limitations. By the late 90s, the rise of DVDs, with their sharper picture quality and no need to rewind, sealed the fate of VHS, turning them into nostalgic relics of a bygone era. It's funny how the little things used to say so much. From dishwashers to fur coats, these treasures told the world you'd made it. Which ones do you remember or wish you had? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what's next.